Climate justice. Climate change not only affects our ecosystems, it undermines the foundation of our fundamental rights, deepens inequalities, and creates new forms of injustice. The right to life is affected, implying life expectancy is reduced. Right to food, right to water, sanitation, health, and adequate housing also negatively affected. The level of impact projected to the year 2025 is depicted in the image shown. Concept of climate change. What we are seeing is elements of climate change. There are basically 4 key elements. Climate vulnerability, there is mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. For adaptation, it's dealing with impact of climate change and ability to absorb change, while mitigation deals with the causes of climate change by reducing emissions. Vulnerability is capacity, sensitivity, and exposure to the effects of climate change, which can be economic or geographic. Resilience has to do with the ability to bounce back from climate shocks or absorbing shocks for improvement of the well-being of the future. To help us in this discourse, we shall look at the following themes. 1. Define key concepts, that is, climate justice, climate equity, and climate resilience. 2. Ethical principles of climate justice. 3. Principles of climate justice. 4. Working towards climate justice. 5. Key factors to consider when thinking about climate justice. 6. Conclusion and policy implementation. Define key concepts. Climate justice. Climate change is one of the greatest global challenges of our time. Its shockwaves are felt worldwide, and not just from an environmental point of view. Climate justice is an important concept in the fight against climate change. It recognizes the uneven distribution of benefits and burdens resulting from climate change. Despite having contributed less to climate change, vulnerable communities often bear the brunt of its negative impact. Climate equity is the goal of recognizing and addressing the unequal burdens made worse by climate change, while ensuring that all people share the benefits of climate protection efforts. Achieving equity means that all people, regardless of their race, color, gender, age, sexuality, nationality, origin, ability, or income, live in safe, health-fair communities. Climate equity can be woven into the broader efforts to address the socio-economic, socio-cultural, and physical impacts of climate change. It is a public health issue in every respect. Climate resilience. Climate resilience is the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events, trends, or disturbances related to climate. Improving resilience involves assessing how climate change will create new or alert current climate-related risks and taking steps to better cope with these risks. Principles of climate justice. To help member states of UNESCO and other stakeholders to make appropriate decisions and implement effective policies for sustainable development as a way of achieving climate justice, UNESCO adopted a Declaration of Ethical Principles concerning climate change in November 2017. Ethics constitutes the substantial core of any commitment. As a mobilizing force, ethics can facilitate arbitration, resolve conflicting interests, and establish priorities. Ethics can connect theory with practice, general principles with political will, and global awareness with local actions. The declaration adopted by UNESCO is based on the following 6 ethical principles. 1. Prevention of harm. To better anticipate the consequences of climate change and implement responsible and effective policies to mitigate and adapt to climate change, including through low greenhouse gas emissions development and initiatives to foster climate resilience. 2. Precautionary approaches. Do not hesitate to adopt measures or preventions or mitigations that address effects of climate change on the grounds of lack of definitive and scientific evidence. Equity and justice. Respond to climate change in a way that benefits all, in a spirit of justice and equity. Allow those who are unjustly affected by climate change due to insufficient measures or inadequate policies to access judicial and administrative proceedings, including redress and remedy. 4. Sustainable development. adopt new paths of development that make it possible to sustainably preserve our ecosystems while building a more just and responsible society that is more resilient to climate change. Special attention must be paid to areas where the humanitarian consequences of climate change can be drastic, such as food, energy, water insecurity, the ocean, densification, land degradation, and natural disasters. 5. Solidarity. Support individually and collectively the people and groups most vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters, particularly in the least developed countries and small island developing nations. Strengthen timely cooperative action in various areas, including technology development and transfer, knowledge sharing and capacity building, scientific knowledge and integrity in decision making. Strengthen the interface between science and policy to optimally aid decision making and the implementation of relevant long-term strategies, including risk prediction, while promoting the independence of science and widely disseminating its findings to as many people as possible for the benefit of all. Pillars of climate justice. Pillars of climate justice recognize the disproportionate impact of climate change on low-income communities of color around the world, the people and places least responsible for the problem. It seeks solutions that address the root cause of climate change, and in doing so, simultaneously addresses a broad range of social, racial, and environmental injustice. These solutions can be organized into 6 pillars of climate change. 1. Social, racial, and environmental justice. 2. Natural solutions. 3. Climate education and engagement. 4. Indigenous climate action. 5. Climate transition. 6. Community resilience and adaptation. Working towards climate justice. To work towards climate justice is critical when addressing climate change. This will help to ensure that climate action is effective, sustainable, and fair. By creating an inclusive and collaborative approach to the decision-making process, it will strengthen public support and reduce resistance to climate action. Moreover, follow through on commitment by wealthy countries to provide aid to developing countries can act as a catalyst for these countries committing to more ambitious climate actions themselves. Climate solutions must benefit all members of society, otherwise it is not a solution. Any form of development aiming to improve the well-being of those living in poverty is also connected to climate justice, as both are impacted by economic exclusion, growing poverty, and inequality. The main aim, therefore, should be to help build strong, self-sufficient communities that can sustain long-term development. Healthcare, sanitation, and clean waters are all areas that support those affected and build climate resilience. It is equally notable that several environmental justice organizations worldwide are working towards climate justice to ensure no community is negatively affected by the impact of climate change. Most organizations are backed by political leaders pushing for climate justice in international fora. There is a lot more that can be done, and policymakers need to consider the potential long-term impact that a response to climate change can have. Factors to consider when thinking about climate justice. 1. Climate justice begins with recognizing key groups that are affected by climate change. 2. Climate impact can exacerbate inequalities and social conditions. 3. Momentum needs to be built for climate justice solutions. Conclusion and policy implementation. Climate justice seeks to address the inequalities arising from climate change, ensuring that vulnerable populations are not negatively affected, and efforts to combat climate change are distributed fairly. It is a critical lens through which we can build a more just and sustainable future for all.